Well everyone, here we are again. Another couple years and another 3D Zelda review. I'm your host Alf, and today we're taking a look at The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. This review is a special occasion to me for a few reasons. For one thing, the second video I ever posted to this channel was, incidentally, a review of Wind Waker. Don't watch it, I was 14, but now you know that. Also, The Wind Waker just so happens to be the first Zelda game I ever really played, and it's one of my favorite games ever. It's easily my favorite pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda game, at least that I've played, so this review could be tricky for me. For a while, I wasn't even sure if I would even make this video. Do I really have enough productive things to say about this game? Am I going to be able to cover it without letting my nostalgia blind me? I guess we're about to find out, because here is my review of Linky and his Maritime Adventure. For starters, many of you already know that The Wind Waker has two different versions. There's the original GameCube version, which you can find used online for like $70 plus original hardware and a controller and a memory card. There's also the Wii U version, which is currently being sold for upwards of $50 on the secondary market. You would also need a $200 dead console to play that version. Luckily, I'm a longtime Nintendo fan and collector, so I've been able to spend ample time with both versions for this review. This is not a video about the fact that Nintendo refuses to re-release Wind Waker on Switch in any capacity, or the fact that you can easily find a free illegal ROM of the game online to play on emulator. I would love to sit here and lament the fact that you simply cannot give Nintendo your money to play one of their most iconic games ever, but alas, I will not mention that today. However you decide to get this game into your possession, each version has its differences. The GameCube version is the original Wind Waker, and the colors are a bit more vibrant in that one. In every other way, the Wii U version is vastly superior. HD, widescreen, modern camera control, gyro aiming, and several little improvements to annoying or tedious parts of the game. Wind Waker HD is the smoother, more fun version of itself, as you'd expect. That's the game I'm primarily discussing in this review, but I'll still mention the GameCube version or show clips of it from time to time. Probably the most unique thing about the Wii U Wind Waker is its inclusion of the gamepad. You can look down at your map without pausing the game, and the same goes for switching items or whatever. Split Screen HD is the best way to play classic Zelda IMHO, but alas, the Wii U was a flop. Okay, now let's move on to Wind Waker as a game and see what it does to progress the 3D Zelda formula established by Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. If you haven't watched those videos before, I recommend you do. Anyway, one of the most obvious flaws in those N64 Zeldas was their presentation. The music was great, and they were certainly charming in their own way, but they were beyond ugly in appearance. All N64 games look like trash, of course, but these are some really terrible graphics. Woof. I also didn't like the controls and movement on the 64 just because of how clunky and awkward those games could feel. Surprisingly enough, Wind Waker just completely fixed all of this. Even in standard definition on the GameCube, Wind Waker looks gorgeous. The cartoony art style is super easy on the eyes, and the colors really pop in the GameCube version especially. And these characters are so goofy and expressive to look at. Link especially has the silliest looking faces, and his cutscenes always make me smile. The music and sound design are masterful as well, which is always the case for Zelda games. Better yet though, the controls are awesome too. Gone are the days of clunky old Link walking at weird, stiff angles and stopping in place every time he rolls. Wind Waker Link runs around smooth as butter, and he's faster than ever now. His roll carries your momentum fluidly without slowing you down at all, making for a really zippy experience. Link looks and controls exactly how I'd want him to here, which adds more to the experience than I can describe. I'm usually not the type to care about a game's presentation too much, but Wind Waker's smoothness really starts it off on the right foot. Nice controls make it fun to just move around and exist in this world, which is not something I can say about the game's predecessors. Whatever comes next in this review, Wind Waker looks and feels like $1 million to play, and that's pretty darn nice if you ask me. All good things so far, but what are you actually doing in Wind Waker? This may come as a surprise to you, but you're going on a quest through various dungeons and tasks to save Hyrule from the tyranny of Ganondorf. Shocker, I know. This game has temples, quests, and swords, but Wind Waker's most standout feature is definitely the Great Sea. The whole game takes place on a series of islands across a vast ocean, all of which you navigate on your talking boat. Sailing around can be lots of fun, and it certainly adds a pirate-like sense of adventure to the game. You can explore the 7 seas to your heart's desire in between story beats, and there's a good amount of stuff to do and find out there. There are dozens of islands, each with their own treasure, challenges, monsters, or any number of other things. You never really know what you're going to find in this game, and that can be a lot of fun. You also get different items throughout that unlock new areas, which adds a fun progression to all that discovery. This is all really fun on paper, but the whole sailing thing definitely isn't perfect. There's a ton of empty ocean between every island, and none of the islands are very big on their own. I believe this system was implemented to give players a giant world to explore without destroying the GameCube on a technical level, and I guess it kind of worked. At its worst, all the empty space between islands can make the Great Sea feel, well, empty. Some places, like Windfall Island, are packed full of stuff to do and find, but so many more places are just like, here's one tiny building with a Triforce chart and nothing else. Bye! Like, if you got rid of the ocean and just had all the islands nestled up next to each other, I'm not sure how the game would function. Maybe there would still be enough content to match other Zelda games, but cutting out all the time you spend sailing would make Wind Waker comically short. I guess there are more dungeons here than in Majora's Mask, but you get my point. Anyway, that's kind of the other main problem with the sailing mechanic. More than anything, it eats up your time. Every once in a while, you'll fight some bad guys from your boat or pick up some underwater treasure, but most of the time it's just... Sure, this is fun in its own way, but it's not that substantial. More often than not, there's simply nothing happening as you sail around. This is a very different thing to make Zelda players spend a ton of their time doing, and I can see why someone would view it as worthless padding. There are, however, a couple things that mitigate these issues. In both versions of Wind Waker, you're eventually required to learn a song called The Ballad of Gales, which lets you teleport to certain parts of the map. This obviously cuts down on travel time significantly. In the Wii U version, there's also an optional swift sail you can get, which makes your boat go twice as fast, and stops you from having to manually change the direction of the wind. These naturally cut down on travel time, but they also help with that awesome feeling of the player becoming stronger as the game goes on. When you get these upgrades, you really start to feel like you're in charge of the Great Sea. It goes from this big, terrifying expanse to your own personal playground, and that's pretty cool. However flawed or functional the Great Sea may be on paper, everyone I know thinks it's super cool and fun. Yeah, maybe it's just a time waster, but sailing across the ocean blue with the wind in your hair and that awesome music in the background never gets old. It's more of what I was talking about earlier, where it just feels fun. It's not masterful game design per se, but there's nothing more freeing and exhilarating than just cutting through the open ocean. Finding treasure, filling in new map squares, it's just a joy. Even if this game is as linear as ever, it's probably the most adventurous and explorative Zelda game I've reviewed so far because of the sailing. Life on the water is a huge part of this game, and I am a big fan. Next up, let's talk about Wind Waker's combat. I honestly don't have a ton to say here because it's very standard Zelda stuff. You target guys and try to hit them with your sword when they expose their weak point. Some of them require the use of an item to open up for attacks. I guess counterattacking is unique here, but it's really just an action command. If the bad guy is gonna hit you, press A to roll behind him and cut off his armor. Done. Combat feels smooth with the nice controls, but there's still a lot of waiting around for an opening. It's not necessarily boring, but this puzzly stuff isn't exactly the best combat in the world. The weakest part of combat in this game might honestly just be how easy it is. A couple bosses at the very end can be kinda tricky, but most of the time you can just cruise right on through. I haven't seen the Wind Waker game over screen in ages. I know Zelda's not Dark Souls, it's not like other 3D Zeldas had brutal combat, but this kinda takes the easiness to an extreme. How much this hurts the game is up to you. I still think it's fun, but combat in Wind Waker is very standard and easy. So those are some nice mechanics, but what about the actual dungeons and the stuff between them? I lamented the obtuse nature of Ocarina's intermediary sections, and I really admired Majora's complex dungeon design. When Nintendo was bringing Zelda to their new GameCube, how did they decide to develop these features? Honestly, they kinda just made everything way easier. I know, I'll talk about it in more depth of course, but that's really the simplest way I can think to describe it. You still have to figure out sequences to open up dungeons and solve puzzles to get to their bosses, but it's all incredibly straightforward. Especially compared to its N64 predecessors, I wouldn't blame someone for thinking Wind Waker is kind of a baby game. Not because of the little cartoon guys, but because of how obvious everything is. When navigating the world between dungeons, there's rarely a question of where you should go next. To be clear, this isn't in some annoying, handholdy way, where your obnoxious companion character won't shut up and let you live your life. You still very much feel in control, but there's rarely any sort of confusion or puzzling out what to do next. They'll mark the location of the next dungeon on your map, and then you sail right on over. Usually there's only a handful of people to talk to, so you can pretty darn easily figure out how to get inside. On the one hand, I really like this change. The confusing nature of these sections in Ocarina of Time killed the game for me, so it's a breath of fresh air to just kinda get stuff done. I appreciate the fact that I can just sort of cruise on from dungeon to dungeon in Wind Waker as opposed to getting completely stuck and frustrated all the time. However, this also makes the game significantly easier than any other Zelda I've played. I really don't mind easy games, I think those can still be super fun, but this could totally be a deal breaker for somebody. The N64 Zelda games were all about puzzling out the intricate story design, but Wind Waker kinda dropped that. Here more than ever, it's really just about going. Adventure awaits. You can explore these islands to your heart's content, and sometimes you'll have to, which I'll talk about later. But for the most part, you'll probably never get stuck. Again, I kinda like this, but plenty of people don't. One thing about Wind Waker's progression that's a little different is that it isn't just a series of dungeons. You beat anywhere from 5 to 7 dungeons depending on how you count, but then the last chunk of the game is all about collecting Triforce pieces. You get a few special maps, and it's up to you to track down the 8 pieces of the Triforce before you take on Ganondorf. Opinions are very mixed on how much fun this actually is, but I think it's a genius stroke of game design. Yeah, it can be tedious, especially in the GameCube version, but I love what this does for the game. It really opens up the map and blurs the line between main and side quests. There's 8 pieces to collect all across the world, and most of them require some slightly different solution to collect. These mini-quests are some of the only parts of Wind Waker where I could see someone getting completely stuck, but I think it works here due to the nature of the Triforce quest. Maybe you'll get to some island and be like, wow, I have no idea what to do here, but it's not frustrating to me like it was in older games. You've still got several other pieces left to seek out. While you're looking for those, you're bound to talk to the fish in the right place, or otherwise learn something to help you. You're going all over the place already to find these things, so needing to ask around feels like a natural part of the experience. It's not like, oh, I can't get into the Shadow Temple, now the game is at a complete standstill. Instead, maybe you'll say, this island doesn't seem to have anything, maybe I can find the answer somewhere else. I might be a little biased, but I think this works. I think it's a lot of fun to hunt down pieces of the Triforce, even if it's just an excuse to make the game feel longer. Everything in this game has been super easy so far, so you won't be surprised to learn that Wind Waker's dungeons are also a complete cakewalk. To reiterate, I loved dungeons like the Water Temple or Great Bay Temple on the N64 because of how rewarding they felt to complete. They were big, overwhelming labyrinths that made me really think about where I was going and what I was doing. I had to slowly piece their layouts together in my head and keep track of all sorts of elements to make it to their bosses. In Wind Waker, this principle, it does not exist. As many game design analyses have described Wind Waker's dungeons, you will never have more than one small key. There's no confusion, no mind-bending layouts to figure out, no nothing. You just go from room to room, and you solve all the puzzles and beat all the guys, and then you're at the end. Every dungeon in Wind Waker is pretty much a straight shot to the boss, and you'll never really get lost or have to think much about where you're going. Again, it's not like Elmo is always off to the side telling you where to go or something, but rather there's simply no way to not know where you're supposed to go. Like, there's only one new place in a dungeon you can ever really be, and that room contains the one puzzle that leads you forward. Obviously, this is an incredibly easy design system, and it is very much detached from what I loved about older 3D Zelda dungeons. However, I don't feel right calling Wind Waker's dungeons bad. If anything, they just seem to be guided by a very different design philosophy. I think this philosophy is similarly visible in everything else we've discussed so far. Wind Waker's developers simply did not want the player to get stuck. For whatever reason, it seems like they actively perceived and made an effort to avoid the confusing and challenging parts of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. A pessimist might say, all things considered, that Wind Waker was designed to be a game for little kids. I mean, look at this, then look at this. Taking the game design shift into account, I think it's reasonable to assume that Nintendo wanted Wind Waker to take a bit of a new direction for the series. They wanted it to target a younger audience in more ways than one. But again, I've got to stop the negativity. Is that bad? Obviously, this is all an opinion, and if you get bored out of your mind playing easy games, it's your right to feel that way. But if a game is pleasant enough to play without needing to really challenge me mentally, I can't say being super easy is a bad thing. As such, are these dungeons worse than Majora's, or are they just different? Is it a flaw that these sequences are all straightforward shots to the end, or was that just the kind of game Nintendo wanted to make in 2002? I don't know, and that's okay. For what it's worth, I tend to view these experiences as smooth and simple rather than boring and easy. Wind Waker's dungeons and progression are very smooth and very easy, and you can do with that information what you will. Real quick, I want to talk about side quests. These are a staple of 3D Zelda that I admittedly did not spend very much time on in the N64 games. Majora especially is renowned across the planet for its side questing, but I never really got into it. Not only did all that stuff seem like a waste of time when the fate of the world was at stake, but those quests confused me just as much as the main goals. I'm gonna get stuck and not know who to talk to for something optional? Like, I'm gonna get bored for fun? No thank you. I know I'm terrible at video games, please don't be mad. Similarly, Wind Waker has a bunch of side quests that I did not do. There's a ton of shop trading, statue collecting, tree reviving, extra content that, in my years with the game, I have never really touched for all the reasons I outlined before. I know most people love that stuff, I think that's awesome, it's just not my thing. However, as I said before, I really admire how Wind Waker's structure was able to blur the line between side quest and main quest. Take something like the Ballad of Gales, which lets you fast travel around the map much faster than sailing later in the game. You'd think an ability like this would be optional, but you actually need it to get inside this secret area and unlock a mandatory progression item. Or look at the teacher on Windfall Island with her rowdy students. It seems like helping her out would just be a nice optional task, but it's not. Helping her unlocks a required island for the Triforce quest, making for one of the most unique and interesting shards you collect. What I'm getting at with all of this is that Wind Waker makes exploration and bonus content feel like it matters in a whole new way to me. In other Zeldas, you can help out townspeople, collect treasure, unlock little upgrades, and it's whatever. It gives you something to do, and it makes Link a little more powerful at the end of the game. But in Wind Waker, you need a lot of this stuff to progress. You need these abilities and this treasure and these monster drops to finish the story, which provides a practical reason to get out there and see what these islands have to offer. It's more fun than ever to explore the map in Wind Waker, and they make all your extra stuff feel more valuable than ever. I love what this does for the game. It makes me feel like I'm really on an adventure with lots of varied tasks to do. It sure beats the same old, go get the 3 things and the 6 things from all these temples, then come beat the final boss. Maybe it's small, maybe I'm just a biased Wind Waker freak, but I love it. Non-dungeon content in Wind Waker gets a thumbs up from me. Finally, let's talk about Wind Waker's story, which I will obviously be spoiling now. Majora's Mask took a whole new approach to Zelda stories, and it ended up redefining the way I look at stories in video games. Wind Waker, unfortunately, just has a pretty good story in my opinion. It's the typical Zelda, slight twist on Link saving Hyrule from Ganon plot that we've all seen a million times by now. I do think the backstory is interesting this time, with how they made the ocean a part of the narrative. The gods had to flood Hyrule as a part of sealing away Ganon a long time ago, and so all these islands are really the tops of ancient mountains. The story is fun and well put together enough that I'm not offended by its formulaic plot. There's also some fun side characters this time, which I support. Link actually has a home and a family for once, which really fleshes out his character and motivations. It's all very standard, but that doesn't make it bad. I think the biggest strength of Wind Waker's story is its ending, which is my personal favorite Zelda ending so far. This epic showdown with Ganon as Hyrule implodes under the ocean is super cool, and I like getting to feel like Ganon is really gone this time. He's not just sealed away, he's at the bottom of the dang ocean with my sword buried in his head. Hyrule is a very safe place now. After the fight, Link goes back to the surface with his new friends to carry out a life of adventure on the 7 seas. He also has a home with a loving grandma and sister that he can come back to. I like this because it feels like I really won. Majora's Mask drew me in like never before with all its mysteries, but the end left something to be desired in my opinion. I had all these burning questions about what caused the events of the game, and most of them were left unanswered. Who was that evil mask thing? Why was he connected to the moon falling? Where is Link gonna go now? Does he have a family somewhere? Where even is Termina? Was Link dead the whole time? Who really knows? This is yet another personal preference thing, but I really prefer to have a strong feeling of resolution at the end of a big adventure. Some people love stories that are all about mystery and that leave you with more questions than answers at the end. I'll admit, any story that really has you pondering even after it's over is probably a winner. Regardless of how you feel about that, Wind Waker is not interested in that kind of subtlety. At the end of this game, you can't help but feel good. Our hero totally won out in every way, and we know exactly how the rest of his awesome life is going to play out. I love it! This is a far cry from the broody, mysterious tale of the last 3D Zelda, but I'm okay with that. Wind Waker's story is simple, but that ending makes it all worth it. Wrapping everything up, where did Wind Waker take the Zelda series? On the negative side, this game was clearly rushed to some extent. It's not unpolished in its presentation or anything, but it shows undeniable evidence of cut content and padding that were needed to release the game on time. It's also remarkably easy, completely stripping away a lot of the intricate, puzzling challenge that defined its N64 predecessors. Despite all that, I can't help but love this game. Even as an adult, it's just such a feel-good experience. If I had to describe Wind Waker in one word, it would be smooth. From the graphics to the controls to the progression to the dungeons to the story, Wind Waker is just a smooth ride. You won't get stuck, and Wind Waker likes it that way. Just sail away with us while we have some fun and save the world. I can't blame a more serious gamer for thinking this is a bad baby game, but I am certainly not one of those gamers. At least the next game is dark and scary. Until then, it's all smooth sailing from here, and I am happy to take that ride any day of the week. Thanks for watching, everyone. I guess this series really is going to take over a decade to finish. Maybe someday you can watch the Twilight Princess review with your grandkids, but I hope you enjoyed this video nonetheless. See you all in 2027. Until then, have a great day.